SIFU, my arms are yours.
Leave. I recognize that uniform. It represents a school for the weak and feeble.
Many games attempted to utilize martial arts to offer a unique combat experience, and while some of them certainly succeeded, none of which came nearly as far as SIFU did. Just a little heads up before we start, SIFU isn't at all story heavy, but the footage I'll be using in this video is all from the first 3 stages of the game. The whole thing is 5 stages, so if you want to jump in completely blind, shut your eyes. Also, all the footage captured in this video is after unlocking every skill to showcase the game's full potential. Now that my conscience is clear, let me give you a little idea about what SIFU's story is all about. The villain kills your father, you see it all as a kid, the villain kills you too, but the magic amulet revives you, woohoo! And you set off to take your revenge. Despite being a super duper freaking cliche, it's still a very well presented story with short cutscenes, solid voice acting, all being narrated in a beautiful watercolored art style. Without further ado, let's get directly into what you're doing the whole time you spend with SIFU: fighting. On paper, it's as simple as light attack, heavy attack, block, deflect, and dodge. However, intuitive controls, excellent animations, and powerful impact with every strike easily sets it among one of the best melee combat systems of all time. SIFU, however, pulls no punches. The enemies don't chill around waiting for their turn to attack. This is where SIFU's excellent defense system truly shines. Holding the left bumper blocks all incoming attacks, but with each attack you block, your structure meter depletes, which eventually leads to breaking your defense, leaving you completely vulnerable to all incoming attacks. A system Sekiro players would certainly be familiar with. Like Sekiro, tapping the left bumper at the right time deflects the attack, inflicting damage to the enemy structure, and when it's full, yeah, ouch. Not only the executions are perfectly animated, but the animation changes depending on your surroundings, whether you're near a wall or a desk.
Keep your distance. No way.
Not just that, but the object's position relative to yours will also trigger different animations. And of course, being armed triggers even more animations. While still taking surroundings into consideration, I truly can't stress enough how much effort the devs put into animating these executions. The defense mechanic I found myself loving the most is, without doubt, evading. Simply flicking the left stick up and down while holding the left bumper lets you evade high and low attacks respectively, which might end up causing your enemy's attacks to land on each other. The result? A combat system that relies on observing and reacting while never, ever losing the flow, even when you're hit. Another mechanic I absolutely loved about SIFU was pushing stunned enemies around. As simple as it sounds, but I did love it because of this, and this. Another excellent way with which you can bend your surroundings to your advantage. Speaking of surroundings, the game has 4 weapon types: throwables, bats, staffs, and blades, all of which can be kicked directly into your enemies' faces simply by tapping the right bumper. I did mention that the game is overall pretty challenging, which adds to the overall feeling of accomplishment each time you beat a boss with less or no deaths, since the death penalty itself is another point of strength in this game. Remember the amulet that revived you when the villain killed you in the prologue? Each time you die in the gameplay, it revives you again. For what cost? Aging. For example, you start the game aged 20. When you die once, your death counter increases by 1, and your age becomes 21. Die again, your death count increases to 2, and your age becomes 23. So dying to a tough enemy or a boss 4 or 5 times in a row will make you age by 4 or 5 years per death. And by the time you reach your 70s, the amulet's magic can't help you anymore. So is there any way in the game you can bring down your death count? Yes, there is. beating tough enemies, which on its own is an excellent decision because this act on its own is super risky. Instead of beating this tough enemy and bringing down your death count, you might end up dying, maybe dying twice, which ends in raising your death count once more. This means while beating a stage which the game calls a hideout certainly unlocks the next one, you still have to consider your age at that point. If you beat the second hideout at 60 years old, this means you can only afford a few more deaths in the even more challenging late game hideouts. So it would be wise to revisit the old hideouts you've already beaten to try to get through at a younger age. Aging also has a direct effect on your gameplay. Since age comes with experience, with each decade you age, your attacks deal more damage. But, on the other hand, your health becomes smaller, which forces you, the player, to act like an experienced fighter yourself as well, focusing on defense while choosing the perfect moments to land your strikes. Now I know what you're probably thinking, replaying the same level over and over is lazy and repetitive development. I know, and generally speaking, I couldn't agree any further. And despite SIFU's levels being almost exactly the same each time you play them, I found myself replaying the first level, for example, over, 20 times through my run, even after beating it without dying once. Why? It was still fun. And I hate grinding, by the way. Besides the death penalty of aging, each death brings you to the upgrade screen, where you can see a list of moves you can unlock by spending the XP you gain from fighting. You can unlock skills like crotch punches, chasing strikes, focus moves, and more. But there's a catch. Each skill you unlock sticks with you as long as you're moving forward in the game. This means you lose it when you either restart a previous level or hit the game over screen. You only get to keep a skill permanently if you unlock it a total of 5 times. This is why you have to manage your XP with care and think whether you want this skill for this specific run, just like roguelike games, or you find yourself using that other skill so frequently so you invest more XP in it to permanently unlock it. As I mentioned in the beginning, I permanently unlocked them all, so I'll be honest, I didn't do so just to review the game. I did because once you get the hang of it, it's so freaking addictive. Okay. What if you're doing perfectly fine with the level, but struggling with the boss? Do you have to run through the whole thing to have another shot at the boss? And no, you don't. This brings us to the investigation board, where you can access all the collectibles scattered across the hideouts, which not only adds to the lore of the game, but you will also find keys that unlock previously unreachable areas in other levels, or even shortcuts that skips huge sequences of the hideout. For example, there was this one door in the very first hideout, whose key is near the very end of the game. This is an excellent incentive to revisit previous hideouts to explore what you missed. Also, one more thing worth pointing out in the combat aspect of the game is the enemy variety. I'm not going to say that the enemy has 1,000 enemy types and all that. It doesn't work this way for me. But they did something different, and I'm not really sure why other devs didn't think of it this way. So in other games, the enemy variety is like the guy with the red hat will strike 3 times, the guy holding a bat you have to hit from behind, for example. Here it's different. The enemies certainly have different models, but the model doesn't have to do anything with the way they behave. Of course, they are scripted enemies scattered across the game, but I'm talking in the general combat of the game you find in the hideouts. You have to observe and react. Despite mentioning all these points of strength, I still didn't get to the one aspect that to me made the game worthy of being called a masterpiece: the scenery. Not only each hideout has its own unique style with its own unique looking enemies, this is a game that recreated Old Boy's iconic hallway fight scene in the first 10 minutes. So yeah, the first level will give you very heavy Raid Redemption vibes. The second is a colorful club with unique lighting and an excellent soundtrack. And despite the first 2 hideouts setting the bar that high, the third is hands down my favorite. It wasn't like anything I've ever seen before, just the devs' pure artistic imagination. As I previously mentioned, each hideout ends with a boss fight, one of those who participated in your father's death in the prologue. But anyway, I usually find myself enjoying boss fights in most other video games, but this was not the case with SIFU. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the bosses here are not good. I think they just felt slightly more restrictive than the other sequences of the game. Instead of sticking to the flow while reacting to incoming attacks, the bosses require a far more careful approach. You might enjoy them even more than I did, to be honest. I can imagine Souls people definitely loving this. These guys have a thing for memorizing attack patterns. Oddly enough, during boss fights, the artistic presentation shines even brighter than the combat does. Each boss has two phases separated with a short transition cutscene, which is always perfect. The only weak point worth mentioning in SIFU is a technical one. I kept experiencing massive drops in the frame rate upon transitioning from one room to another. I don't recall experiencing any technical issues mid-combat, so I think it's only worth mentioning, but I'm not going to score the game down for that. Overall, SIFU is an innovative piece of art that offers a solid combat experience in the most artistic way possible, leaving its unique footprints in the gaming industry, as well as establishing itself as an inspiration to look up to.